This is AP Biology. We are talking about plants and fungi and the evolution of these organisms on land. Previously, we have discussed how plants went being from an aquatic environment to having adaptations that allowed them to survive on land. And then they've developed the vascular tissues and then seeds and flower structures like angiosperms. What we're going to focus on in our final video for chapter 17 is fungi. And so let's start looking at these organisms in more detail. When we talk about a fungus, what we're actually talking about is a collection of cells that all are growing together, and these threads that grow together are called hyphae. Now, the hyphae, when all of them are combined, is what we call a mycelium. So you can see in this picture all of the different hyphae that are now as a group referred to as a mycelium. Now, the thing about fungi is that they can't move, they can't walk around, and yet they're able to actually grow and get to food very rapidly. And the thing that's interesting about how the fungus gets their food is that they actually absorb their food by digesting it on the outside of their bodies. These are heterotrophic organisms. So far in talking about plants, we have focused on photosynthetic organisms, or autotrophs. These fungi are heterotrophic, which means they must eat or consume to get their energy. And so they're eukaryotic cells, just like plant cells. But what's interesting about them is that they digest their food externally. So what happens is a fungus will be growing and as cells will release the digestive enzymes. They'll go out into the environment directly next to the cell and they'll break down any food that's there, which then allows it to be absorbed through the membrane or the hyphae directly into those cells. The thing about fungi is that their life cycle involves some reproductive structures and they differ. And so there's often what are known as asexual and sexual stages. The other thing about fungi that's interesting is that they have haploid, which is half the chromosomal numbers. They have diploid, and then they have something called heterokaryotic. And heterokaryotic is where the two nuclear structures are next to each other, but they haven't fused yet. And so if you put two haploid cells, they kind of come together, but they haven't fully fused to become diploid yet. We consider them to be heterokaryotic. And you can actually see them in this diagram. So here we have a red fungus, and here's the black fungus. If you notice, they grow together where the cells have actually fused. And so within one cell is red and black combined. Now, this is known as the zygosporangium, or whatever is heterokaryotic, which means there's the two different nucleuses, but they haven't fused together. And then once they finally do fuse, then that's where you get your diploid organism. Now, the thing about the fungal groups is that they reproduce pretty cool. And so if we look at this structure diagram, what you actually see when you see a fungus above the ground or a mushroom sprouting up is you're actually looking at the heterokaryotic mycelium. You're looking at the production of the heterokaryotic organism, so the combination of two different fungi. What happens if you look very closely at the underside of a mushroom is you'll see that there's this structure that's called the basidia. Now, the basidia is actually the reproductive structure where the two nuclei or nucleuses from the heterokaryotic have actually fused together to form a zygote. So now we're diploid, which then undergoes meiosis to produce the spores. And those spores then grow into the mycelium. One's red, one's black. And then they actually will grow until they fuse again to become heterokaryotic. You sprout up a mushroom, which then allows for the fusion to happen within the basidia. You go through meiosis to then become spores again. Now, the thing about the evolution of fungi is that they have a pretty cool lineage. The most recent one are the club fungi, and those are the mushrooms you typically think of when you think of a mushroom, the kind that you see sprouting up on logs or in grocery stores. But there are other types of fungi, and we're going to look at those now. So this is one of the kind of coolest looking fungi, and if you actually look at their structures, what happens is they're very clear, but they have that bulbous black top on them. They're just interesting. Now, these are the Acetomyces. They're pretty cool. These are the ones that are the cup fungus because the shape of them actually looks like a cup, or they kind of look like a sponge or a very rough kind of sea sponge. Then there's the Basidiomyces. These are the ones that look like the mushrooms that you typically think of when you think of hiking through the forest or in a grocery store. And then again, the underside, you can actually see the linear structures. Those are those basidia. That's where the fusion or the zygote actually will form, where you become a diploid structure. If you look at the blown up magnification, you can actually see the fusion releasing the spores, the red and the black spores. Now, one of the things about fungi is that they have a lot of benefit in practical uses. One, they're decomposers. So they break things down, which then allows nutrients to be available for other organisms to use. They also provide some of our antibiotics. So there is some medical uses. And then they, of course, they provide good cheese. Here's penicillin growing on an orange, which looks gross. That's what mold is. It's a fungus, but it's very useful. They actually can be parasites, which is a bad thing. Some of them are predators, which make us ill, but mostly they're used as decomposition or for food. Now, there is some examples of parasitic fungi. There is about 80% of all plant diseases that affect our crops or our farm. They are fungus. And some of them actually can have some serious complications with if they get into humans. They also form really cool relationships with other animals. So for example, there are animals that benefit from having the ability to digest, or because of having lichens, which is a type of fungus, they can actually get digestive qualities from them. And so they're able to eat things. So for example, these ants, they eat plants. They can't actually digest the plants that they eat. They have to rely on the lichens that are inside of them to actually digest it for them. And then here's another really good example. So what a lichen is it's an algae or cyanobacteria with fungus wrapped around it. So here's the algae, and then here's the fungus wrapped around it. And so when you see lichens growing on rocks, that's actually what you'll be looking at. The cool thing about this idea is that there are entire industries devoted to this relationship. Oranges from Florida, California, and Texas, they actually rely on fungus in order to grow. And here's why. There are mycorrhizae, which basically is where the plant roots are wrapped in the fungus. And what happens is that fungus then secretes the digestive enzymes, break down nutrients in the soil, absorb them, and then the plant absorbs the nutrients straight from the fungus cells. And so everybody's happy. The orange trees get the nutrients they need to grow. The farmers get oranges for a crop, and then we get to eat the sweet fruit that comes from that thanks to the fungus. And so here's actually, if you look closely, you can see the fungus wrapped around the branch in this picture. That's the end of our discussion on plants.